At $2.5 million, something genuinely strange happens to your perception of reality. It feels like you've unlocked a cheat code in the game of capitalism. For decades, you've been told that hard work and long hours are the only path to success. But suddenly, you realize your money is making more money than you can ever hope to earn with your time. You have officially crossed the inversion point. This is the precise mathematical threshold where your capital becomes more productive than your labor. While the rest of the world is still grinding through 60-hour weeks for a paycheck, your portfolio is quietly generating $400 a day while you sleep, making your presence at a desk not just unnecessary, but a mathematically inefficient use of your remaining life. Today, we are performing a forensic audit on the psychological shift that occurs when you stop being a worker and start being an architect of capital. Let's begin with the lie that built your cage. The modern worker is trained to think in one dimension: income. How much did you make this month? What raise did you get? What bonus are you chasing? What title justifies your exhaustion? But income is not wealth. Income is motion. Wealth is position. Income is what flows through you. Wealth is what stays with you. And if you build your identity around flow instead of storage, you can spend an entire lifetime mistaking motion for progress. That is economic slavery in its most elegant form. Not chains, not force. Just a beautifully engineered treadmill where your value is measured by how efficiently you can convert your nervous system, your attention span, your youth, your weekends, and your joints into direct deposit. The system does not need to imprison you physically if it can convince you that permanent busyness is moral, that fatigue is status, that burnout is ambition, and that the highest form of adulthood is becoming a compliant machine with a mortgage. So let us audit the actual numbers, because numbers are less sentimental than culture. At $2.5 million in investable assets, with a conservative annual return of 6%, your capital generates $150,000 a year. That is not fantasy. That is arithmetic. Break it down and it becomes roughly $12,500 a month. Break it down again and it becomes about $410 every single day, including holidays, weekends, sick days, airport delays, family emergencies, and the random Tuesday afternoon when you decide to do nothing at all. Meanwhile, the median worker is still taught to celebrate a salary that often lands somewhere around $60,000 a year, maybe $70,000 if they are doing well, which means their entire adult identity is still organized around producing less in a year than your portfolio can produce while you are half asleep on a sofa. And this is the moment the brain begins to fracture away from consensus reality, because once you see that capital has outpaced labor, you can never fully unsee it. The desk stops looking like a source of security and starts looking like a confession. The calendar stops looking like structure and starts looking like extraction. Meetings start to feel spiritually offensive. The performance review becomes absurd theater. You are being graded on effort in a game where ownership is the only variable that compounds. This is why the work ethic dogma begins to die at the inversion point. Notice, I did not say discipline dies. I did not say excellence dies. I did not say contribution dies. I said the dogma dies. The moral mythology that says working harder is always a virtue collapses under mathematical pressure. Below the threshold, more effort can still matter because labor is still your primary engine. Above the threshold, effort must be measured against opportunity cost, and this is where most people's mental software is catastrophically outdated. They are still operating with factory-era code in a capital-era game. Imagine a wealthy professional crossing 7 figures, then being offered a $20,000 bonus in exchange for another 6 months of 60-hour weeks, chronic stress, strategic blindness, and no time to think. The worker mindset says yes, because money is money and hard work is noble. The wealth architect says no, because the trade is defective. If your capital base is already large enough to generate 6 figures passively, then sacrificing your cognition, your health, and your strategic bandwidth for a short-term bonus is often a bad trade. Not emotionally, mathematically. Because what is the real cost of those extra 60-hour weeks? It is not just time. It is the inability to source better deals. It is the inability to restructure your holdings. It is the inability to identify a tax inefficiency, exit a bad manager, acquire a small equity stake, underwrite a real estate opportunity, negotiate a better capital allocation, or build the ownership vehicle that actually moves you from comfortable to sovereign. A tired person can earn. A clear person can architect. Above the inversion point, the job is no longer your engine. It is often the distraction. And the culture hates this realization because the culture is emotionally dependent on the worship of effort. People do not want the game exposed. They want the bedtime story preserved. Work hard, keep your head down, be grateful, and one day you will be rewarded. But the wealth architect has no use for bedtime stories. We audit systems, we inspect incentives, we separate virtue from utility. And the truth is merciless. If your money makes more per day than your labor does, then continuing to organize your life as if labor is supreme is like insisting on rowing after you have installed an engine. That is the efficiency flip, and it is one of the most misunderstood transitions in wealth psychology. Below the threshold, time is your most valuable asset because you have too little capital for money to do meaningful heavy lifting. Your labor matters. Your skill matters. Your output matters. If you are at $50,000, or $150,000, or even $400,000 depending on your burn rate, then your hours still possess real marginal importance. You are still in the accumulation trenches. You still need disciplined execution. But once you move into serious capital territory, the hierarchy changes. Capital takes the throne. Time remains precious, but its best use is no longer wage extraction. Its best use becomes allocation, design, judgment, pattern recognition, relationship selection, and protecting the machine that now does the work for you. This is why a wealthy person working for $300 a day when their portfolio generates $400 a day is not just being modest or disciplined. They are accepting payment in a currency worth half its face value. They are exchanging a strategic asset for an inferior one. The poor and middle class are trained to ask, how much does this job pay? The wealthy ask, what is the highest value use of my cognition? Those are not the same question. One belongs to survival, the other belongs to architecture. One is about filling the tank, the other is about owning the pipeline. And when this shift hits your brain, daily life starts to mutate. You stop admiring people simply because they are busy. You stop confusing high effort with high leverage. You stop celebrating salaries that come with golden handcuffs and start examining whether your life is being purchased below market value. The old identity resists this because most people have been praised for obedience, not leverage. They were rewarded in school for compliance, rewarded at work for responsiveness, rewarded socially for appearing industrious. But capital does not reward appearances. Capital rewards structure. This is where the grind becomes a mathematical error. Not because work is evil, but because work without leverage becomes a low-efficiency mechanism once you have enough assets. The treadmill is useful only until you can afford the vehicle. After that, staying on it is not noble. It is irrational. Now here is the uncomfortable truth almost nobody says out loud. The path from $500,000 to $2.5 million almost never comes from salary alone. This is the third milestone, the one that punishes honesty, because it exposes how narrow employment really is as a wealth instrument. Salary can stabilize you. Salary can educate you. Salary can seed the first portfolio. Salary can create optionality if paired with discipline. But salary rarely breaches the third milestone by itself unless the salary is extraordinary and the lifestyle is monastic. Why? Because salaries are linear, taxed aggressively, capped by employers, and psychologically designed to feel bigger than they are. Ownership is different. Ownership compounds. Ownership scales when you are absent. Ownership can reprice violently upward. Ownership can be sold. Ownership can borrow. Ownership can spin off cash flow and equity simultaneously. Ownership is how you stop participating in the economy as an employee and start participating as infrastructure. This is why equity in a business, real estate held intelligently, concentrated bets in startups, profit-sharing stakes, carried interest, and asymmetric ownership vehicles matter so much. Not because they are glamorous, but because they are the only mechanisms with enough torque to bend the curve. The worker is paid for contribution. The owner is paid for position. The worker gets a paycheck after value is created. The owner gets paid because value was created inside a structure they control. That distinction is everything. If your plan to become sovereign is simply to become a more efficient employee, then your plan is defective. You are trying to cross an ocean by swimming harder instead of acquiring a boat. And once you understand that, something psychologically difficult happens. You realize the system never intended to teach you ownership fluency at scale. Schools trained you for competence, not capitalization. Employers trained you for reliability, not escape velocity. Financial advertising trained you to feel sophisticated for buying products, not for building structures. Even your social circle may quietly punish ownership thinking because it sounds arrogant to people who have normalized dependency. But dependency dressed up as humility is still dependency. The leap from $500,000 to $2.5 million is where the entire game changes from productivity to architecture. The question is no longer, how can I earn more? The question becomes, what do I own that grows whether I am present or not? And now we arrive at the antagonist system, because no forensic audit is complete without motive. Why does modern society keep people hypnotized by income while ignoring net worth? Because income creates obedient behavior. Net worth creates independent behavior. Income can be throttled, reviewed, delayed, denied, taxed, benchmarked, and psychologically manipulated. Net worth, once large enough, starts giving people the ability to say no. And no is a dangerous word in any system that depends on compliant labor, recurring consumption, and financial illiteracy. Employers want you focused on compensation because compensation keeps your identity tethered to their institution. The financial industry often wants you focused on activity because activity creates fees. Consumer culture wants you focused on status because status converts savings into depreciation. Everyone around you profits when you confuse cash flow with freedom. This is how lifestyle creep becomes a weapon rather than a mistake. The moment your income rises, the environment rushes in to absorb the surplus. Better apartment, better car, better restaurants, better watch, better school district, better vacations, better aesthetic, better reasons to remain owned by your overhead. And because the upgrades arrive wrapped in the language of reward, people do not experience the trap as captivity. They experience it as success. But wealth is not the visible upgrade. Wealth is the retained option, the thing you could spend but do not because you are buying back your future. And then there are management fee traps, the polite robbery of people who do not understand compounding friction. A 1% annual fee sounds harmless to the untrained mind. Just 1%, barely visible. But on a portfolio marching towards 7 figures and beyond, that fee is not a charge. It is a silent equity partner with no downside. It is friction installed directly into your compounding engine. Over years, it metastasizes into hundreds of thousands, sometimes millions, extracted not from your income, but from your timeline. The same is true of tax inefficiency, high turnover strategies, emotionally induced panic selling, chronic dilution through bad deals, and the endless parade of financial products built to keep you active instead of effective. The system does not need to stop you from getting rich. It only needs to keep you slightly distracted, slightly overspending, slightly overpaying, slightly under-owning, and slightly too exhausted to notice. That is enough to ensure you never quite reach the inversion point. Because once you do, the psychology changes. You become harder to manipulate, harder to scare, harder to recruit into games that no longer serve you. You stop asking for permission to breathe. But crossing the line is not the end of danger. It is the beginning of a more subtle war. This is where the psychology of protection matters, because 7 figures do not just buy freedom. They trigger new vulnerabilities. History is full of intelligent people who won the right game and then lost because they failed to update their mental model. Consider Nicolas Fouquet, the French finance minister who amassed spectacular wealth and then made the fatal error of displaying it with theatrical confidence. He built too brilliantly, hosted too lavishly, and signaled power too openly in the presence of a king who could not tolerate the comparison. Fouquet's lesson is brutal and permanent. Once you have wealth, visibility becomes a liability if it awakens envy inside a stronger system. Flaunting wealth is not merely vulgar, it is strategically stupid. Then there is Robert Morris, financier of the American Revolution, a man who crossed into immense wealth and influence, then overextended through speculation, leverage, and misplaced confidence until the structure collapsed around him. Morris teaches the second rule. Crossing the line does not make you invincible. It makes your errors larger. When your base expands, arrogance compounds too if left unchecked. That is why the Medici principle matters so much here. The Medici did not merely accumulate capital. They updated their mental model to match the environment they had entered. They understood that new levels of wealth require new rules of behavior. You cannot think like a hungry operator forever. Hunger gets you moving, but it can also make you reckless once you have something to protect. The mentality that helped you get to $2.5 million may not be the mentality that preserves it. The opportunistic aggression that was useful at $200,000 can become ruinous at scale. The appetite for visible proof, public dominance, constant expansion, and ego-driven risk must be re-audited. The sovereign mind learns discretion. It learns redundancy. It learns cash buffers, counterparty risk, governance, succession, legal structure, tax planning, reputation management, and emotional sobriety. It learns that preservation is not cowardice. Preservation is architecture under pressure. This is where many people fail because they assume wealth has ended the need for psychological evolution. In reality, wealth intensifies it. The game is no longer accumulation at all costs. The game is intelligent permanence. Can you hold what you built without being seduced by applause, panic, novelty, or excess? Can you resist turning a solved problem back into a crisis just because your identity was addicted to struggle? Can you stop performing wealth and start engineering life? And that is the final reframe. Wealth is not about what you can buy. That is consumer propaganda aimed at children in adult bodies. Wealth is accumulated choices. It is the right to decline nonsense, the right to leave bad rooms, the right to think in decades instead of deadlines, the right to protect your health before it becomes a negotiation, the right to spend a Tuesday with your child or your own mind without asking permission from a manager who earns less from assets than you do. Wealth is not the car. Wealth is the ability to never again make a life decision from financial panic. Wealth is not luxury. Luxury is often just visible overhead. Wealth is invisible control. It is silence, margin, negotiating power, emotional decompression, time reclaimed from compulsory labor, attention reclaimed from trivial urgencies. If you miss this, you can hit $2.5 million and still remain psychologically poor, still chasing validation through titles, still needing a room full of people to witness your relevance, still trading your life at a discount because you do not know how to inhabit freedom. But if you understand it, then the inversion point becomes more than a number. It becomes the death certificate of economic slavery. It is the moment you stop worshiping the grind and start interrogating it. The moment you realize effort was never the highest virtue, accurate allocation was. The moment you stop asking how to make more money and start asking how to construct a life where money serves design instead of dictating behavior. This is architectural sovereignty, when your capital, your systems, your ownership, and your psychology are aligned well enough that you are no longer reacting to the economy like prey. You are shaping your environment with deliberate structure. You are no longer a worker renting stability from institutions. You are an architect building stability from assets. You are no longer trapped in the hourly translation of your existence into payroll. You are converting thought into structure, structure into compounding, and compounding into freedom. That is why $2.5 million feels so strange to the brain. Because it is not just more money, it is a reversal of the ancient hierarchy you were taught to obey. Labor is no longer king. Time is no longer auctioned by default. Capital has taken over the workload. And once that happens, success is no longer measured by what you can afford to display. Success is the realization that you have finally won the game of capitalism and can stop running on the treadmill. Calculate your current inversion point and see how close you are to winning the game.